But it's okay. I need them so that I can vote for it, and then I'll make sure Steve gets it. Oh, he's gonna stand over here. He's gonna leave it from the left. Yeah, he can leave it right there. It's fine. That's it, right?
I think that's
This one here. There you stand right there. All right. So those of you who are joining us online, letting you know, I started this late because there was a lot of excitement in the air, and as much as I hate to break up the conversation, we do need to try to honor time and so forth. So we will get started. For those of you who are new, and to me, I'm Daniel Brown, the chair of the Interim right now, and I am really excited to see what seems to be some new faces, and then some faces we haven't seen in a while. There is a sign-up sheet over by the coffee. If you see your name, just put a check mark next to your name. If you haven't gone over there, please do so at some point before you leave. If you don't see your name there, please write your name. We have application forms over near the table. If you haven't re-upped, remember we re-up every 2 years, $30. The $30 allows us to rent facilities, keep running, and keep things going. It's not a huge investment, I think, over the course of 2 years, but it's a very necessary investment for our committee. And so please do that. If you can, those of you who are collecting, Sandy is our treasurer. She's the one you really want to give the checks to and so forth. But before the day's out, right near the end, I need all of the applications so I can read off the applicants so that we can vote in our new members. So I have 2 right now. If I can get them all, that would be great. If quietly or casually, people can just pass them in to me. If you don't have money today, you can always just mail the check later. Just make sure to put it in the memo that you filled out the form. You can take it with you and mail the whole thing if you like.
What if you don't remember whether it's been 2 years or not?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know what to say at this point. We would gladly take an extra $30 donation. And just know that every dollar that you donate to the Anna Democratic committee is $1 less than the opposing group is getting. And so if you want to vote against the opposition, give us some extra money. If you like. So I'm sorry I can't answer 100% there. All right. So with that, we have Everett here who is going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. And since he's getting ready to start school, it's nice to have that little practice. And our flags over here, so stand.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. That's awesome. All right, I have a few things to share before we get started. First, I have a thank you letter from Josh Kronberg, and it says, thank you, I'm so grateful for all of your support. Let's go win this thing and remove the BG from his seat. Gratefully, Josh. And I think BG is probably a good name because there's nothing good about that, right? So, yeah. And if you're not familiar, Josh Kronberg is running in the 5th, and he's one of the 2 congressional candidates we have. The other one is Herb Jones. And so we also have a letter from Ethan Lynn, who has become quasi-famous now in our community. It says, Dear Hanover Democratic Committee, thank you so much for your incredibly generous scholarship towards my college career. I have loved my time getting to work alongside all of y'all, and I had great hope. I hold great hope for the future of our county. Sincerely, Ethan Lynn. And you're not going to see him for a while because he's now in college. So it was nice that he's still thinking of us when he's off doing greater things. Let's see. Oh, sorry, wrong one. All right. So I found it odd that when the FBI, which is supposed to be like one of the chief intelligence agencies in our community, is being touted as like a third world country police group. I thought that was odd that would even be a thing. And how could someone not know that they're taking public documents into their private storage? It's just strange to me. And I will never understand someone pleading innocent to a crime they haven't been accused of. It's really, really strange. I don't know how that works. You know, it's but that's the argument that I've been hearing. There was a reading at the school board of about the LGBTQ policy, but there was no discussion about it. So I don't know, when we come to that, we will have an open, people will talk on it, but there was no discussion about it after all of that work done. So that was a little disheartening not to hear what our members were thinking. But anyway, I've seen a lot of letters to the editors about the Biden administration and their great accomplishments, and there are many. And it would be greatly appreciated by all of us if any of you are so inclined to write a letter to the editor of any paper you want, a local paper, national, ones that are virtual, digital ones, print, anything. And because there've been a lot of good things, and I can't go through all of the list right now, but recently he was able to pass some bipartisan legislation for infrastructure and for things that actually hit home. And if you have time to like read up on that, it's quite impressive, because that's not an easy feat to do in a politically charged world where we have an ex-president who still believes he's president, but blames everything that's happening on the current president who he believes isn't a real person. I don't know how that, I don't understand the world, but that's what we are faced with right now. So without any delay, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, and I'm just going to read off because I'll forget so many things. But Clark has served as our chief of staff of Ralph Northam, who may be remembered actually as one of the best governors we've ever had, with the removal of very hurtful monuments, with the changing of names, with infrastructure payments. He was one of the first to get on board with the broadband expansion, and we became a model for the country. And I know a lot of people don't know that, but that is a model that happened under his regime, under his leadership. Virginia has been the #1 place to do business 3 out of the 4 years that he was the governor, and I think it was #2, the 4th one. And I could be slightly wrong on it, but I do know at least 2 years we were #1.
Yeah,
And
and he had the most diverse cabinet staff.
he did have the most diverse cabinet staff. And all of that is coming under Clark Mercer's direction with that. And I really liked it when he was campaigning for governor, because Clark had this idea that, hey, I know Northam is this highly spoken guy. So he says, why don't you just go have beers with people, just go sit down and just have a conversation. So that's what the whole campaign was. So when he got elected, I was so thrilled to have somebody who really just cared about people in general. And so he currently is the president of the Ashland Theater. If you've been thinking about what the Ashland Theater has been doing, book fair, book reading, sightings, there have been live band performances, there's been current movies, which my children say, gosh, that's so exciting that the current movie that's there is right here in Ashland. So anyway, I'm just really excited to know that we have still in our presence somebody who loves the community, loves our state, loves people, and is willing to put forth the work and effort. So with that, Clark Mercer, our guest speaker.
Thank you, Dan. And when Dan asked me to speak, I kind of pointed out I don't have my really want me to come speak, and he said, yeah, maybe talk about the arts in the community. Thanks for the kind words about the Northam administration. Raised the minimum wage, expanded Medicaid, got rid of the death penalty. Governor Northam paroled more individuals in the state than every governor in the history of the state combined. And my wife, who's sitting up there, was our Secretary of the Commonwealth for 8 years. She's the only individual to hold that seat for that position for 2 terms. And she restores civil rights. If someone's gone to jail, committed a felony, they're not able in Virginia to re-enter society fully after they've paid their full debt to society, time in jail, parole, probation. Virginia is one of 2 states in the entire country where that's the case. You have to petition the governor and ask, pretty please, may I please be able to vote again, be a notary again. And so they started under Governor McAuliffe, restoring civil rights, saying if you've done your time, and we're going to do it, 45 other states do it, restore your rights. And after a Supreme Court challenge by the Republicans who didn't like that, Kelly actually has her signature on more restoration of rights orders than any individual in U.S. history. Now, within Medicaid program, I'm really proud of a lot of the things that didn't make the news. Obviously, we have 700,000 more folks now that have health care. There's a big report out a couple weeks ago that shocker, folks that have health care are more financially stable. Yeah, we made that case for a long time. We also made sure things like doulas were covered under Medicaid. We made sure that some of the deterrents to dropping folks who were on their way to a path to citizenship, they could be dropped after a certain number of weeks. That's no longer the case. We made sure that women, particularly women of color, are kept on Medicaid for a full year after giving birth. We look at the birth rates across the Commonwealth, and there's discrepancies. Penny mentioned diversity in the upper echelons of the cabinet. First cabinet in state history that was majority female. First openly LGBTQ member of the governor's cabinet. First Muslim American who also happened to be a veteran and school teacher in our cabinet. We had a former police officer. We had former veterans in the cabinet. And certainly when you look at the appointed folks, a lot of diversity, much more so than you've seen. For the state workforce, we've seen a lot of kind of back and forth the past few months. Look, we've got 120,000 folks who work really, really hard. They don't get paid what the private sector counterparts do. So we tried best we could to put in place some support for them. We put a 529 contribution program in place for state workers. We put a one-time loan repayment in place for state workers. We had successive pay raises in each of the governor's budgets. We had the largest teacher pay raise by generation. And we also had the most progressive leave policy. If you have a child, adopt a child, foster a child, 8 weeks, 100% pay. You couple that with your 4 weeks to get the federal level, that's 12 weeks, 100% pay if you foster or give birth to a child, which I'll tell you a lot of folks come up and say thank you because I wouldn't have gotten that time off otherwise. So it was a fast paced. I was actually on Capitol Square for 8 years, serving as chief of staff. And when Dan asked me to speak a little bit about arts in the community, I thought, you know, my son, some of y'all remember Everett when we moved here. It'll be 11 on Tuesday. We moved directly from the hospital in Alexandria. And so if I can remember how old Everett is, I remember how long I've lived in Ashland. And, you know, I got my first lesson first day I moved here. You know, they said, well, I've been here with someone I messed up 50 years. I'm still a comer still. You'll never be from here. I said, okay, that's fine. And I live in the English's home. I don't live in my own home in Ashland. You live in whoever's home used to live in your house, which is fine. But about 15 years ago, I chaired the Alexandria Democratic Committee. So I went from the bluest jurisdiction in the Commonwealth to one of the reddest, right? And I've spent a lot of time around the state at other committees and kind of seeing how they're structured, how they run their meetings. In the past, that seems like the past life now as political director of the state party. And I'm coming full circle to your asking you to talk about arts. We used to meet the Alexandria Democratic Committee, they still do it, Minnie Howard School on Braddock Road, and the Alexandria Republican Committee also met. And the observation that I've made to folks when we were making the case for our candidates up there to get elected was I never saw the members of many of them, of the Republican Committee out in the community doing community things. I didn't see him at the food banks. I didn't see him at school-related events. I saw them huddle once a month at Minnie Howard. And because they didn't have many elected offices, they were, in Alexandria, they were unencumbered to take the furthest right position as possible. Because they didn't have anyone that they worked for that was elected in the city. And in doing so, they frankly kept making themselves and more and more unelected. And so I always would mention that to our Alexandria members that if I saw someone at the HDC meeting, I also saw that week at the Partner Shelter or at Christ Church or at the PTA meeting. And so when I moved here to Hanover, I was curious if the situation would be reversed, frankly, right? I wondered if at the time we met at Old Fashioned Coffee and Tea, and I said, you know, I wonder how involved everybody is. And I'll tell you, really, really involved. I see folks from our committee out and about the community all the time. While I serve on the theater board, I just jumped on the Habitat for Humanity board. We've got John Starr, Jim pulling that. I'm on the sports backer board downtown. I see folks with Circles Ashland. I see folks with a Hanover Tavern, with all sorts of things. And I would just say that in addition to serving as members of the Hanover Democratic Committee, I think it's critically important, especially in a community that it's hard to elect Democrats, to be involved in as many community events as we can, because I care about safe and affordable housing, and I'm also a Democrat. I care about there being a space in town in this community for people to get together, to be entertained, to laugh, to cry, to be challenged. I care about the First Amendment or all the amendments. I'm also a Democrat. I care about public education. I do support our teachers. I'm also a Democrat. We can never get in the posture here where folks don't see us but once a month at Iron Horse. They don't see us throughout the month doing things in the community. And I will tell you, and I'll talk a little bit about the theater, and then happy to take some questions. All sorts of observations from one administration to the next that I'll see that camera, so I'll be mindful of what I say. But you know, when we moved to town, we were really excited that there was a theater, and so we're gonna bring our kids down the street and show them the theater, and it wasn't open. And I turned to Charles Hargrove, town manager, and said, "Why don't y'all change the marquee? It just says welcome to Ashland, like say welcome back, students, happy 4th of July, really anything." He said, and the theater had been donated at that point to town. They were kind of sitting on it. He said, "Well, we don't have the staff to change the marquee." I said, "Well, I can do it in the morning before I go to work." And he said, "Well, you'll probably fall off the ladder and say something obnoxious about the town." So that's probably not far off. So why don't we write an MOU, indemnify the town if I fall off the ladder and kill myself, and I'll vet everything that I put on that marquee. Now, at that time, the marquee before the theater got renovated, plastic, had begun to become brittle, and there were big chunks of the marquee out. So you really had to think through what you wanted to say, because you had like big chunks out of your sentence. So it's like, I can imagine if you went by, you'd be like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's space right there, but that was wise. I started changing the marquee for about 4 or 5 months, and you meet everybody in town. It's the old neon. If you hit it a little bit, it breaks. It's like getting to know folks in town. I went back to Charles 4 or 5 months later. I said, why don't we change the poster boxes out? There's old wooden drama masks, and you could do something with old classic movie posters. So we don't have the staff or the money to do that. So we'll amend the MOU. I'll buy the posters and put them up. So we amended the MOU, and then where this is going. I said, why don't you all show something in the theater to see what would work inside the space? We said, there's way too much work that needs to be done in the space to get an operating license from the county. You'll never get one. And I said, well, if I in-kind all that work and figure it out, get an operating license, can I run the theater in a pop-up mode? And Charles kind of called me on my bluff and said, sure, yeah, go, but knock yourself out. Well, at that time, you'll remember there's a gentleman down the street, Chopper Dawson, at Blue and Yellow House with the studios now. He and I become friends. He's a general contractor. Hugh Joyce from James River Air, Bow Tie, Cillian HVAC unit. He had his gallery, Flux art gallery. He was interested. So I went to them and said, I got the green light to do some work. And 3 or 4 months later, we spent a lot of nights up there. They spent a lot of nights up there. I was like passing them beers, doing whatever. It's like you want to work with my father-in-law, hand me the camera or whatever kind of stuff. But we did a lot of electrical work, plumbing work, patched some holes in the ceiling, got an operating license. And I thought we would show a couple movies and then hand it off to town. And it kind of was as simple as saying, well, Dan, what do you like? A Top Gun. Okay, we'll show Top Gun, figure out how to license it. We put a backpack blower on at the end of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, blow everything down at the bottom of the theater and sweep it up. Well, that turned into 2 years, 140 events, and 40,000 people coming in and out of the doors of the theater. And during that time, there was a big debate in the community about the future of the space. And it really was intended when it got donated to be for the community. So there's a couple of different schemes that the town was considering that folks weren't happy with. During that time, we put together a nonprofit board and submitted a formal 80-page application, 10-year pro forma to run it as a nonprofit. So we have a mission statement. We spent a lot of time consultants helping us with. Basically, it's to pay people to laugh, to learn, to be challenged, to be entertained, and to feel safe, right, in the community. So we have been rocking and rolling now for 8 years or so, putting up a one-screen theater. I can assure you it's not easy. The reason why most of them are going out of business. COVID didn't help at all, regardless of mitigation strategies. Nobody really wanted to be sitting next to 300 of the best friends. So we did a lot of online type of events, a lot of virtual authors, things like that. But it is a space that that we program with an eye towards being as diverse as we can. We showed in the heat of the night 6 years ago and had a community discussion on policing and disproportionate impacts communities of color. This has always been an issue. It's an issue for more people now that we've had some high-profile murders, but that was a time when it wasn't as high profile. A few months ago, we had Adriana Trigiani, who wrote the book Big Stone Gap is what she's best known for. She used to write for A Different World and Cosby Show and things, but she has a whole series of books from Southwest Virginia. She came as part of her book tour to the theater, and she contacted me before she came, and she said, David Baldacci is going to be with me. Is that okay? It's like, okay. They're sitting number 1 and number 4 at the time on the New York Times bestseller list. So I opened up RTD. I'm thinking, this is pretty cool. We go from having Adrian, like, we got to make a thing of this. What's my hope to make a thing of this? And I read a headline, Hanover supervisor proposes banning a book. So it's like, not really surprised to read this, but let me give it a little stroll here, and I'm sure it's going to be one of the books that people talk about. Well, it's a book by a woman named Zetta Elliott, who is a Black author from Canada, lives in Chicago, and she's just a brilliant children's author, and it shouldn't be unique, and it's a little sad that it is unique, but she writes books from the perspective of young Black boys and and they're fantasy books to take place in urban settings. So she's had a hard time over years getting a publisher to agree that there's a market for a book that features young Black children with fantasy in cities. There's one book called Place Inside Me. It's a poem that won the Caldecott Award for illustrations. Won the top award you can get for children's books, the entire world. And when you think there's 130 school boards in Virginia, you think there's, you do the math, do that out with 50 states in this whole world. That book has never been suggested anywhere in the world to be banned, except for in Hanover County, the first county in the country to ban Kill a Mockingbird. Okay, so I said when I got my book, I called Zeta's publicist. I said, "Have you all heard of Hanover County?" We haven't heard of it. I said, "Well, we'd like to fly you out to headline our book festival, inaugural book festival. We've got some, some folks that can be on the undercard with David Baldacci and Andrew Trujillo. We want you to be front and center." And so she came out and headlined that event, Richmond Public Schools. It was broadcast all of their classrooms, and it was at the theater with Michael Paul Williams moderating the discussion. Just last week, we had Danica Roan, who's the first transgender elected official in the country to be elected and seated in the state legislature. She's from Prince William County. She was up signing her books, talking about her experience running for office. And we have a diverse staff at the theater, and we think it's important to give a voice to folks in the community all the time, but particularly when they're being, for lack of a better phrase, picked on by our appointed and elected officials. So that's the theater. We show Maverick tonight, which is pretty awesome. So we also have a lot of fun up there. But we held the Hanover Republican Committee's candidate forum, the Beaver Dam seat. This is the full circle piece, and I always have to tell my family when I'm done talking, and I'm almost done. We agreed that we would host the candidate forum for the Beaver Dam seat, and this was hosted by the Hanover Republican Committee. It was moderated by John Reed at the RVA, I said I'd introduce everybody and go my way. Now, when I went to the theater and went backstage, made sure that everyone was okay. I wasn't sure how they were taking me, right? They were a little bit surprised maybe, but I said, look, I've been a local chair. I understand these things it's like pulling your hair out. You all have a nice debate. And they had one candidate out of 3 show up. 80 people were there in the theater, and they had one candidate out of 3 show up. And it was interesting, the observation I made and have made is that the gentleman who ended up winning was not the insider Hanover Republican Committee's insider's pick for that seat. And it showed me that the committee is actually becoming very similar to the committee in Alexandria. That while Republicans are elected, obviously, majority in Hanover, the committee has become a bit insular and perhaps not as representative of the whole community as they might think. Because when you have a committee and it hosts a debate, and you have one of the top radio hosts, conservative radio hosts in the state moderating, and you only have 1 of 3 show up, that tells you something. That tells you something. And it tells me that there is openings and there are openings in this county for folks who are involved. Now, I'm not blow hot smoke here. It's tough to elect Democrats in Hanover, don't get me wrong. But when you look at someone like Faye's experience, and what got Faye elected was not her letter after her name. It was a record of service for decades in different groups in Hanover County. And so while it's the theater for me, I know other folks have a ton of other activities and priorities. I would just encourage us all to continue to be involved in the community because, Ethan says he has hopes for the community, wants to come back here after he graduates. I do as well. And that Beaver Dam election, I think, should, obviously, look, I imagine it's still a Republican area, but the fact that the ordained committee choice didn't win should tell you something. So I'm happy to answer questions about the theater real quick, Dan, or move on, or answer things about administrations this fall, anything anyone has, or to sit back. get another cup of coffee.
So thank you for that. That's very good update in the state and also the theater. Before we get started with questions, when someone asks a question, I'm just going to try to repeat it as best I can or shorten it, just so that if there are people online or also says on YouTube, in case you want to go back and say, man, he said some interesting things, I want to go back and check that out. So I want to have that. But the reason why I invited Clark here for the art thing is, for me, art saves lives. And it is either saving a life because that person's expressing themselves through art because they feel like they can't express it any other way, or it saves lives because when we're feeling defeated or deflated, we can appreciate someone else's art. And so for me, art has been like a community saver. And so when I heard that there were members of our greater community wanting to remove art, a book, a poem, whatever, to me, that was almost like removing life. And so that's why I wanted. So anyway, open for questions. And thank you. That was a great update. Yes.
And what office are you running?
The question is, what office is Clark running for?
Question should be, what office am I running from? Kelly and I both have taken a fair number of months to decompress and kind of think about next steps. We're both staying in the area. We're both committed to supporting good candidates kind of moving forward. We know a bunch of them who are thinking about what they're going to do next. And I do think it's I'm not trying to, I have no plans to run for anything, but I do think it's an interesting moment for the Democratic Party statewide. There's a little bit of a vacuum of leadership right now in terms of rallying some folks, articulating a path forward. We obviously had leadership change in the House of Delegates, the House members well. The House and Senate are up next year. We've got, there's maybe new maps there. So, we'll probably be involved in hopefully helping some folks who want to run. But we've got some great candidates. I know Herb Jones's folks are here, and he's someone who's been at it for a while and been a very strong supporter. And so we've got some folks we need to support this year. Yeah.
Can you give us a telephone number for Hanover Democratic?
The telephone number for the Hanover Democratic
So
Committee
we
is
can reach
my telephone number.
coach information. Yes.
You want, my telephone number is 804-647-9958. We don't have an office, so I am the office.
And what's your name?
Daniel McGraw. MCGRAW.
647-9588.
9958. 804-647-9958. It's public knowledge. It's been out for decades, so I'm not afraid to take phone calls. I've had radical, crazy, Republican-ish people call me, and that's okay. I can deal with that. But I would appreciate more reasonable people like you calling me. So that would be nice.
You know, administration, they keep going on abortion, not women stop getting abortion. They have crisis pregnancies, and I think it's administration. And they help women get abortions, support them, give them also release the baby, before everything. And I sure supports them and everything. I think it's a good program because I believe babies, that's my belief. Obviously, they shouldn't kill. And we're made in the image of God, and we feel a fresh thing. And I'm not sure I need to be killed because so many people like it out.
So let me try to summarize that quickly. So in supporting of women who feel like pressured to have an abortion, but might be willing to have a baby if they had support or someone to help with adoption. Yeah. So she was just asking, are there any programs that might help support people who may not be ready to have a child but don't want to give up that child either, or the fetus, or however you want to support it. I sum it up. Did I sum it up okay? Did I sum that? All right.
I just think, women in your job, I feel baby, then they ask me, oh, like, what did the mama was pregnant for, I don't know, 17, which is crazy. She couldn't feel it. And I'm passionate, and I just think it's totally wrong to kill babies. I love babies. I think I'm
I understand. I don't really have an answer for that, but do we have a program that helps people
And
that
I
answer.
appreciate you repeating that question. Real quick, I think, you know, almost every program and organization that we have that is there to help women think through their reproductive choices is there to support women if they decide to birth a child or not birth a child. So that's the majority when you look at Planned Parenthood or NARAL, the majority of the effort, the money, the programs that they have are supporting women and families and young children, babies. And so, you know, I don't think you could go to a church or community center or Circles Ashland that helps our homeless population here in town. I think every one of those groups is supporting women who decide to have babies and give birth. And I think it's a great kind of misnomer to groups like Planned Parenthood. Folks think that when you look at their budgets and you look at their programs, it's the minority of that program that goes towards the reproductive choice of deciding to have abortion. The majority is providing health care. So we were, yeah. And
Well, we're gonna get off topic too. Okay, all right.
You've certainly made your point. Everyone's got a strong opinion on this issue. So
That was very informative.
yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I'm extrapolating. We're talking about how women is like us people in various ways so that our own scripture is not rather other dogs, other religions. Would you extend that idea to
Yeah, that's a great question. How do we communicate with people that don't agree with us, right? And it's interesting. I've had a sketch for a program that I'm considering kind of rolling out. When folks ask me, I've been involved in 25 years in state government policy and elections in Virginia. Just the degradation of civility I have seen. Look, people have always disagreed, and you read about getting fights in Congress back in the 1800s. I get all that. There's a lot of factors that have led to just civility going out the window, right? I think social media, we can talk about its strengths, and communicate instantly with the world. You also, if you wanted to say something mean about an elected official 40 years ago, 30 years ago, you have to write a letter, really think about it. If I really want that shown in the paper. Now you can put it on Facebook instantly, and you communicate with folks that just agree with you. You can turn on a news station tonight that's just going to agree with you and just going to, reinforce your already set in stone worldview. So I think it's important, and it's one of the things that Governor Northam was good at. Is he was a little bit like, he grew up on a farm, had a country accent, served in the Army, served in the Gulf War with treating soldiers, and when he would get up on the floor, get up on a podium, and talk about the fact that Black and white women don't have the same outcomes in childbirth. You would look at some of his counterparts from rural Virginia or other white guys, and it's a little bit, it sets them back a little bit because they're not used to hearing that from someone that fits his profile. And that's why I think it's important to be in the community and be at your church helping pack up, backpacks for back to school. I grew up in the Methodist church, the same church where my parents met in second grade, where they came back and they taught Sunday school for 25 years. Now I don't go around wearing my religion on my shirt sleeve, and but I understand religion, and I'm Methodist, and it's something that I'm proud of. So I don't want the Republicans to be able to these bunch of heathens in Hanover County. I think the Bible instructs us, as do most religious texts, to treat people with dignity and respect, not pick on them. So, when we talk about this transgender policy, it gets me so upset because I see a group of kids that's getting picked on. Now, that's a pretty simple way of putting it. Okay. Appreciate you bringing him out.
Same-sex marriage, God short, some more because homosexuality. Medical lifestyle, and you know, from the states.
All right, thank you. All right, folks. But you know what? You can lead by example. And- oh, it's okay. But hey, you know what? I think that was almost a good example. You asked the question. I mean, look, I get that a lot. I can assure you, for the last 8 years coming back to Coffee Platch in Hanover County, I've gotten a lot of opinions and a lot of folks that don't want to engage in a civil way. I would just not take the bait, and hopefully it just empowers you to make a bigger donation to the committee, knock on more doors, because you know what? While yes, go volunteer for Habitat for Humanity and go do good at church, it's still going to be tough dynamic in Hanover like Democrats. And for me, I like to get fired up. It's what gets me on doors, gets me motivated. And those kind of interactions, act civil, don't get caught on camera acting uncivil. But I'll tell you what, at the events I hold at the theater, I've got to hire off-duty police and security. When Zetta Elliott called and said I would come to Hanover, but everything I've read, I'm concerned for my safety. That's got to tell you something that doesn't make you entirely proud of the dynamics of the community. Someone is so nervous to come to the community based on threat. And we've had plenty of threats. In the theater, I've had the last, and I'll wrap up, I promise. About 4 months ago, my daughter came to me in the house and said, "What is that man doing outside?" What man? And I look outside our front door, and there's a 12-foot sign with the F word with Biden. And it's right on the street, a legally parked vehicle. And then the guy's on the street corner, and he's videotaping my home. He's live streaming to his January 6th buddies my name, where I live, and telling folks to come into the town of Ashland, teach me a lesson. And so I know the state law well enough. And I call the Ashland police. I said, "You can't target someone's phone. It's illegal." They say, "Well, we agree with you. It's a misdemeanor, so we'll be by." So they swing by. They said, "Well, we got to run it by the Commonwealth attorney first." And I said, "Well, that may not be great for this getting resolved." And the word back a few days later from our elected Commonwealth attorney was, "This is free speech. It's gray area." And they tried this in Virginia Beach. It didn't work out in district court, which has no precedent in our district court. And I said, "Okay." Next weekend shows up again. Next weekend shows up again. Next weekend shows up again. I had a big sign of aborted fetus, hooping and hollering, everyone driving by, getting arguments out my front lawn. And I contact my old counterpart, the governor's office, governor's chief of staff. I contact the attorney general. I say, "Guys, there's a law. This isn't supposed to be happening. I could use some help here. Something could happen." Guy talks about being armed on his videos when he comes to my home. Crickets. Nobody's saying anything to me at the state level. Then all of a sudden we've got a big Supreme Court decision. And some Supreme Court justices' homes. People walked out from those homes. All of a sudden I heard something from the governor's office on TV. They said, "Fairfax County, there's a law. Y'all should be enforcing it. There's a law. This is all political because we're Republican, that we back the blue, and this is ridiculous. Y'all need to be out there and protect these justices." And I emailed them. I said, "Guys, I've been asking for this for 14 weeks. And I made a point to make sure that made it in the news that, there's Republicans and Democrats. Now, you may agree with that law or disagree with that law. I couldn't, that you can change the law if you want. But they're right that in Fairfax, there's a law, there's a state law that you cannot target an individual's home. You can't pick it outside their home. And you can say, yes, that should be something that's covered under free speech, which is fine, but it's not the law. And I just thought it was interesting. It's something that Dan touched on earlier. You either back the blue and enforce the law, or you don't. You've got to enforce it for Democrats and for Republicans.
Okay, getting back to the news update. I know nobody wants their name and address and phone number and whatever publicized. I don't know if that's unlawful or a civil case or whatever, but here's my point. in this country, aren't we supposed to have the right to petition the government and take it when we disagree with something?
Oh,
As
absolutely.
long as we don't get violent?
Absolutely, yeah, you can petition and picket at a government building, on a public sidewalk, at a place of business. The code is very specific about a private place of residence, which again, there's people of fair mind disagree with that. But it is the law. It's just entertaining to me, and I'm not completely sold on the law, to be honest with you, but I just thought it was interesting that it was not being enforced for me, and then overnight, all of a sudden, it needed to be enforced for other folks. So, well, I mean, if folks had their own motivation, but yeah. Gotcha. Yep.
I think there's a difference between going to somebody's house and going to the General Assembly or governor's meeting.
But I think, yeah, getting back to the larger point, I think just how we engage, and it's, I coached high school soccer for 8 years. I know Dan's coached. Kids always complain. They'll foul. It happens basketball, football too, whatever. Some kid gets fouled, and the kid who gets fouled hits the other kid, or kicks back, and that's the kid who always gets caught, and that's what the ref sees, So it's trying, but you gotta remember when you're out there in the community, you represent this committee, and you got to try. And if there's someone, we've got protocols in place for people heckle at the theater or at events. It's similar to protocols that were in place when I worked in the governor's office. But the whole point of heckling is to get a rise out of the person you're heckling and to get them to respond. That's the whole point. And it's not limited to politics. I mean, not everyone will tell you the reason. That's the reason he heckled me when he wants something. So you just got to try to keep it cool. So.
Thank you. I know people have more questions, but I want to honor us getting started. Will you be able to stay around for a few minutes after this? So
Thank you all for having me.
So thank you. Okay. All right. So I got a few more people. We got some more. Thanks. Got more people signing up. I thought we were being quite respectful, answering, at least entertaining the question that might have been hurtful for us. And I was grateful for Clark's candid response. And so we have evidence of how other people might respond. At any rate, school board of supervisors updates. Jamie Durant could be here, but Colleen Barry said that she would be willing to give us a little bit of an update. Is that okay, or you want to wait till close to the end? Okay.
So I'm assuming most people know the third for school professional development. Is that good? Yes. Okay. That was assigned for the professional development for the school that resembled the school board, the superintendent's response was that it was designed by a teacher. They don't have a process, which rings very hollow, and it's in many ways. The other piece in terms of the school board, John Bell was elected to co-chair again, even though Bob Huntley was next in line. Be the co-chair, so with John Red's appointment, the school board has now a majority of anti-equity and anti-human rights members, which kind of falls in line with what they're trying to do with the proposed transgender and non-binary student bathroom and locker room policy that they proposed last week. As far as I'm aware, for the ACLU, it does not follow Virginia state law. It's intentionally cruel and has a lot of hoops that these students would have to jump through. They've had public comment last Tuesday. They have another meeting that's coming up Tuesday on August 16th at 7 p.m. I believe. You can sign up to speak if you want to. And then they're going to plan on voting on August 30th because they want to have it in place before school starts.
The other piece is that at the August meeting, there's a variety of community service boards that report to the school board. All of them were up for renewal with their bylaws and approval of new members. All of that happened except for the Community Equity Advisory Board. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Bob May told a member that board has been tabled for now, which reads what you wanted, that I don't think it's coming back. As far as the Board of Supervisors, after 7 months of no vice chair, Sean Davis was elected, kind of in an unusual meeting. It was not on the agenda. It was heard during a meeting. It's important to remember that in 2023, every Board of Supervisors seat will be up for election. So think about who you might know in the community that would want to run. Jamie is happy to help anybody who has any questions about that. And remember that the Board of Supervisors still appoint school board members. So it's not just your Board of Supervisors that you're voting on. Essentially, you're voting for your school board members. I think that was it. And also, if anybody wants to write this card for her kids, I have. Thank you.
Yes, and in case you missed that, she has lots of packets for postcards for her kids. If you'd like to sign up, that's an easy way to get involved. It's non-aggressive. It's a lot of fun. Candidate updates. Hi everyone, my name is Steve Grant. I'm the field organizer for Herb Jones, Virginia. Someone said it earlier, I can't help myself. Good faith faith. And the Bible says, "You shall love thy neighbor." That's the sentence. So I'll leave it at that. But I spoke to Joette earlier, and she has told me that we have a certain person in Congress that she likes to refer to as Dr. No, because he votes no against taxes. Because he doesn't want veterans to get those benefits behind. He votes no against climate change bills because it doesn't save climate change. And he votes no on the Inflation Reduction Act. And I don't know why. I can't give you a reason for that. But we've got some real potential here for Joe. He's got a long storied career in the Army. I wish I could give you all the details, but I can't. Because I can't remember them because there's so many. He served 30 years. He became a colonel. He earned a Bronze Star in Afghanistan. And I think he's a real candidate. We could really use this country. We've got a lot of problems. And unfortunately, Dr. No wants to vote no on everything and say, I'm going to sit around and be happy with what we have. So Joette came up with a really good idea and said, we need to start writing letters to the editor, because as I look around the community, unfortunately, some people's legs and knees aren't quite what they used to be, and they can't seem to canvass quite as well as they used to. You still feel like you're up to it. I've got a lot of canvassing tactics up here, and go door knocking in Ashland or Mechanicsville. I got tons and tons lit in both areas. If anyone wants to pick them up today. I know we've got postcards that you can write, and postcards help so much. You would not believe how many postcards we go. We've ordered shipments of 10,000 postcards and come back 2 months later to say we're out of postcards. Didn't send 50 postcards out. I mean, yes, thank you so much for organizing it. I'll talk to you later, but thank you so much for needing more postcards. Everyone needs more postcards. Williamsburg needs more, Chesterfield needs more, and Franklin needs more, now Hanover needs more. We've had so many postcards go out. The heat has been awful. I've been out canvassing. It's very hard, but we just got a couple cooler days. So hopefully this weekend we can get that back, get the people out there. As soon as the heat truly breaks in mid-September, we're going to hit the ground as hard as we can. We've got, I don't know, we've got so many people in this district who need their doors knocked because they don't know that they've been redistricted between
Chesterfield County, Henrico County, Williamsburg, and Hanover, something like 60% of the district is in a completely new area, voting for two completely new candidates that never heard of. So we need to get the word out that one, can't vote for Abigail Stanberger anymore because she's in Fredericksburg now. We have to vote for her. And two, we need to make sure they know that Herb Jones, an Army colonel, he has a Bronze Star. He has owned his own small business for the past 20 years, and he's going to do everything he can to make our country a better place. So I have business cards, I have donation slips, I have canvassing packets. So if you come up to me after the event, I can hopefully get you set up with anything you want to do to help.
Thank you.
The canvassing packets have this biography, so we know what, if we do a postcard, if we go, we can.
I can't hear you.
Oh, I
Does
see.
the canvassing packet have information about what to say on it, so we know what to, when we knock on doors, what to do?
So in any event, we use, there is a little script, and I can go over with you, or I can tell you like the important stuff now. The important things are one, personnel, Army colonel, Bronze Star, Kennedy District, and Diego Practice. Those are the big important ones, and I find that usually, once you get through that, people are like, okay, please go away. If you want more information, there is more information in the email that will go over, like, here are some more specific things. But if you have any specific questions, I can do my best.
The canvassing packet, we will get that kind of a phone card that has 75 information.
Yeah, there's also a lot of information back here. So if you want to read the packet, you say, oh, okay, these are the top issues, and you can resolve that way.
Thanks. Other candidate updates, is anyone from Josh Greenberg here? No, okay, so the update I can give you from Ashley Hall, she's out of town, is that they've already knocked on hundreds of doors in Hanover, and if you wanna knock on doors, they're doing it almost every Saturday, obviously not this Saturday, she's out of town. And it's pretty nice, you can either be a driver or a door knocker. So if you're like the non-aggressive type person, you get to sign up to be a driver, and you can talk about all the good stuff that your door knocker does, if you like when you drive. It's really fun. And then I want to give an update for Rachel Levy, because she's both campaigning with Herb Jones, but she's also getting ready for her campaign next year. And I know it's confusing because she needs to raise a little bit of money as well. So if you're considering donating to a candidate and you say I have $100 to give, maybe $90 to your candidate now, and then maybe $10 to Rachel Levy, something like that would be great. She's doing $10 Tuesday. She's not going to take away the campaign, but in order for her to qualify for things, she needs to have a following. The state party needs to know that she has people supporting her in order for her to qualify for more benefits. So I want to give that update. And now women's yes, turn the mic to you.
I think most everybody knows how I really talk to you. We probably heard from one talking to we're trying to reach out to more women in the county. We reach out to a lot of women who are Democrats, but are not involved particularly with coming to our HDC meetings, but a lot of our HDC members who also come. We have a great time. We have a social time at the beginning of our meeting. We meet at different women's houses, volunteer hosted around the county. And we also know we're there for politics. We talk about current politics. We have our candidates come and speak to us at different meetings. Our upcoming coffee will be on August the 23rd, and that's going to be at Carrie Debo's house. Carrie, I don't have her exact address with me, but she lives very close to our Memorial Regional Hospital. So that's pretty central location for most of us to be. It's at 10 o'clock. I hope that y'all will be able to come. If you're not on my mailing list, please give me your mailing address and I'll try to get the invitation out to you. I have had some difficulties with being hacked, and so I'm getting out the invitations. That is not so really short. So I hope that everybody will remember that it is coming up on the 23rd, and we will be getting more information out to you. So thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. We have time to vote as two members. I have one member, of course, I cannot read. So if you fill that one and you don't hear your name at the end, please just say your name and then I'll try to get this written up so that I can read it. I'm just not able to figure that out. Ironic, because as a teacher, I usually can read everything. So members that have applied, Elaine Capiatori, Lisa Stroud, Glenda Stroud-Peace, Harold Ackerman, Penny Boyd, Seth Brandt, Kara Brandt, Otis Fulton, Katrina Van Huss, and then I have that other. Before that, I have this other person that has applied, but I can't read it. Who's the other? There's somebody here who filled out this, and then
That woman with the white hair.
that might have been it. If that's the case, she needs other things. Then okay. Anyway, is there a second? All in favor? Any opposed? All right. Any new business come before us? Is there a motion to adjourn? We are adjourned.
Yeah, that was exciting. That was an exciting meeting.